I didn't ruin my life. That's the sentence I repeat to myself when I try to explain how I ended up here. Nothing collapsed. Nothing burned down. There was no single mistake dramatic enough to point at and say, that's where everything went wrong. If you look closely, you won't find disaster in my story. You'll find something quieter. Delay. I kept thinking there would be time. Time to decide. Time to change direction. Time to feel ready. I believed life was something that waited politely while you gathered courage. I didn't realize that life doesn't wait, it moves, with or without your participation. At first, delay felt responsible. I told myself I was being careful, that rushing decisions leads to regret. I watched people leap into choices they couldn't sustain and told myself I was smarter than that. I would move when things were clear. Clarity never arrived. Days passed in a way that felt harmless. I woke up, did what was required, handled what needed handling, and went to bed tired but intact. Nothing demanded urgency. Everything could be postponed without immediate consequence. That's how it began. I remember believing that wanting more was a phase. That restlessness fades. That eventually you settle into your life and stop questioning it. I thought questioning was a sign of immaturity, something you outgrow when reality teaches you restraint. So I restrained myself. I softened my reactions. I lowered expectations. I adjusted my dreams into something easier to carry. Whenever something inside me pushed for more, I told it to wait. Just not now. Just not yet. Later became my favorite word. People around me didn't see a problem. Why would they? I wasn't unhappy in a way that demanded attention. I wasn't failing. I wasn't lost. I was stable. Predictable. Manageable. I fit neatly into my life. They assumed I had chosen it. I let them. Inside, something was slowly disengaging. Not breaking, disengaging. Like a muscle you stop using because everything around you is designed so you don't need it anymore. I didn't feel pain. I felt absence. I stopped feeling pulled toward things. Opportunities passed and I evaluated them carefully, not by how they made me feel, but by how disruptive they would be. If something required too much courage, too much explanation, too much risk, I postponed it. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment never came because I kept training myself to avoid moments that demanded anything from me. Time started behaving strangely. Weeks disappeared without leaving memories behind. Entire seasons felt interchangeable. I could tell you what happened, but not what mattered. My life became a sequence of tasks instead of experiences. That scared me, quietly. At night, when there was nothing left to distract me, I felt a pressure in my chest that wasn't anxiety and wasn't sadness. It was the awareness that I was living on the surface of my own life. Observing it instead of inhabiting it. I would ask myself questions I didn't want to answer. What am I waiting for? When did I decide this was enough? I never had clear answers. The truth I avoided was simple: I hadn't decided anything. I had allowed my life to shape itself around my hesitation. Every time I chose comfort over movement, certainty over curiosity, I taught my life how little it could ask of me. And it learned quickly. I didn't lose my dreams in one moment. I misplaced them slowly, the way you misplace something you assume you'll remember later. One day you reach for it, and you can't even recall where you last put it. That's when the fear began. Not fear of failure. Not fear of loss. Fear of waking up one day and realizing that nothing dramatic had gone wrong, and yet everything important had passed while I was waiting to feel ready. I started noticing how old my excuses sounded. How often I told myself I was still young enough, still early enough, still in time. I didn't notice when those phrases stopped being true and started being comforting lies. I wasn't ruined. I wasn't broken. I was delayed beyond recognition. And the most terrifying part was this: no one had done this to me. There was no villain in my story. No obstacle big enough to justify the outcome. I had simply let my life slip away quietly, one reasonable delay at a time. And I was starting to understand that waiting too long doesn't protect you from regret. It creates it. Once I admitted to myself that my life hadn't been ruined, only delayed, the weight of that truth became impossible to ignore. Delay sounds harmless until you realize it has a cost, and that cost is time you can never ask back for. I started noticing how often I spoke in conditional sentences. If things change. If I feel ready. If the timing is better. My life was built out of hypotheticals, none of which required me to act. They gave me the comfort of intention without the risk of commitment. Intention is a dangerous substitute for action. I told myself I was still choosing, just slowly. That I was being thoughtful, not afraid. But the longer I watched my days pass without resistance, the clearer it became that I wasn't choosing slowly, I was choosing never. The signs had been there for years. I just didn't recognize them as warnings. I had grown comfortable with neutrality. Excitement felt suspicious. Urgency felt reckless. Anything that disrupted the careful balance of my life felt unnecessary. I confused peace with numbness. My body carried the truth long before my mind accepted it. I woke up tired no matter how much I slept. My chest felt tight in quiet moments, like something inside me was pressing against a door that had been locked for too long. Ordinary conversations felt distant, as if I were listening through a wall. I functioned well. That's what made it so easy to ignore. People told me I was patient. Wise. Sensible. They admired my ability to wait things out, to not rush into decisions. I accepted their praise because it made my hesitation sound like virtue. It allowed me to hide behind maturity. Inside, something resisted being praised. Late at night, I began counting losses I couldn't name publicly. Not jobs I hadn't taken or relationships that ended, but versions of myself that never got the chance to exist. The person I might have been if I had moved when I felt the pull instead of silencing it. The life that required courage instead of caution. I realized how often I had mistaken fear for wisdom. How easily I labeled my hesitation as intelligence, my restraint as discipline. I had learned to rationalize staying still so well that movement began to feel irresponsible. That realization hurt more than regret ever could have. The moral dilemma was unavoidable. If I continued waiting, nothing catastrophic would happen. That was the illusion of safety. I would remain intact, respected, functional. I would grow older inside a life that made sense to everyone else. If I stopped waiting, if I acted without certainty, I would face consequences I could no longer soften with excuses. I would have to confront the possibility that I had waited too long, that some doors were already closed, that starting now would only highlight what I had lost. That possibility terrified me. Some nights, I thought about disappearing. Not dying, disappearing. Leaving the life that had formed around my delay. Starting somewhere I wasn't already defined by waiting and caution. The thought scared me, but it also made me breathe deeper, like oxygen after a long time underwater. I couldn't unfeel that. I tried to talk myself back into patience. I reminded myself how dangerous impulsive decisions can be. How many people regret acting too quickly. How stability is something you protect, not gamble with. Those arguments had always been enough before. Now they felt rehearsed. One evening, I caught myself saying later out loud, without thinking, and the word sounded hollow. I realized how often I had used it to end conversations with myself. How effectively it had silenced questions that deserved answers. Later had become a way to avoid choosing at all. That night, I sat with the uncomfortable truth that delay is not neutral. Waiting is not passive. Every day you don't choose is a day you actively give up the chance to become someone else. I wasn't standing still. I was moving away from myself slowly enough to pretend I wasn't moving at all. For the first time, waiting felt like a decision instead of a pause. And once you see that, the comfort disappears. Every morning you wake up and do nothing different becomes a reaffirmation of the same choice. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew this: if I kept waiting for the right moment, I would eventually wake up in a life where there were no moments left that required me to be brave. And that realization hurt more than acting ever could. I didn't act because I felt ready. I acted because I finally understood that readiness was the excuse I used to protect myself from loss, and it was costing me everything quietly. The moment didn't feel heroic. It felt exposed. I made a choice knowing it wouldn't recover what I had already delayed. Knowing it might fail. knowing it would force me to live with the truth instead of postponing it. That was the point. For years, I had believed that acting late was worse than not acting at all. I thought delay preserved possibility. I didn't realize it was erasing it. By the time I moved, some doors were already closed. Some versions of my life existed only as outlines now. Accepting that hurt. There is a specific pain that comes from understanding you waited too long, not because someone stopped you, but because you kept telling yourself you had time. That pain doesn't scream. It sits in your chest and asks you to live anyway. So I moved. Not quickly. Not cleanly. I moved with doubt clinging to every step. I questioned myself constantly. I wondered if this was courage or panic, clarity or desperation. Old habits don't disappear just because you see through them. Fear stayed with me. It told me I was making a mistake. That I was destabilizing a life that worked. That I was trading certainty for struggle. Some days, I believed it. Some days, I missed the comfort of waiting, the familiar numbness, the illusion that nothing was lost yet. But even on the hardest days, something was different. Time stopped slipping through me unnoticed. Days felt heavier, not because they were worse, but because they required my presence. I could feel the consequences of my actions immediately. Regret had edges now. Hope did too. I was no longer protected by delay, and that vulnerability made everything sharper. I grieved what I had lost. That grief didn't disappear once I acted. I mourned the years spent waiting for permission that never came. I mourned the chances I softened into later until they disappeared. I mourn the versions of myself that never got to exist because I was afraid to move without certainty. But I stopped letting grief decide for me. I learned something painful and freeing at the same time. Regret doesn't come from acting late. It comes from never acting at all. From confusing patience with fear and caution with wisdom. From believing that waiting keeps options alive when it's actually closing them one by one. Acting didn't give me back what I lost. It gave me back authorship. I was no longer watching my life drift forward while telling myself stories about timing. I was inside it again, making imperfect choices, accepting imperfect outcomes, feeling the weight of days instead of letting them dissolve. Some outcomes disappointed me. Some confirmed my fears. Not everything worked out. That's the price of action. But none of it felt hollow. None of it felt borrowed. I wasn't living in hypotheticals anymore. If you're listening to this and telling yourself you're just waiting for the right moment, ask yourself, honestly, how long you've been waiting. Ask yourself whether delay is still protecting you, or quietly replacing your life with something smaller and safer. Because there is a moment when later stops being a pause and becomes a habit. And habits don't announce when they turn into endings. I didn't ruin my life. I didn't destroy it in one mistake. I let it slip away slowly by waiting for courage to feel comfortable. Taking it back didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the past. What it did was stop the quiet loss. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do isn't choosing wrong, it's choosing nothing and calling it patience. I waited. I lost time. And the moment I stopped waiting, my life didn't become easy, it became mine.